our dream list, our wish list, our Christmas list, whatever you want to call it, into something that was a little bit more manageable. And mine would look something like this, Jacob's Christmas list. And here's an example when I was a kid. Baseball cards, pogo ball, I don't know if anybody knows what that is, monster truck, okay? And at the end of my list, always, when I was a kid, always at the end of my list, it would say this: presents and surprises. Presents and surprises. My twin brother Jason had a little different strategy than myself. I have an example of one of his lists here in front of me. This is Jason's Christmas list. Tonka truck. I'll just read a few of these, okay? Rainbow Bright. Easy Bake Oven. Let's see here. My Little Pony. Okay? So you get an idea. I just read a few of those this morning. And the thing was, Jason usually got most of it. He got most of it. Now, I imagine we have several in this group this morning who are youngest of siblings, okay? If you are the youngest of a sibling, young or old, I don't care how old or how young you might be, if you're the youngest of siblings, would you just raise your hand? Just raise your hand where you're at, youngest of siblings. All right, we got a lot of you. Keep it up if you would, please. Everyone else, look at the youngest siblings around you. Go ahead and look them in the eye and just say, bless your heart. Okay, because it's not their fault that they're spoiled far more than the rest of us. It's not their fault. Now, I can say all this because I am not the youngest child, not even close. Actually, Jason was born a full 35 minutes after myself. So I am not the youngest child. There was something within me, even as a young child, that I still have. And it's that desire to experience the unknown. You see, for me, presents and surprises represented things, this desire to be awed, this anticipation of the unknown. Now, I've been privileged to go to many beautiful places all across this world. Some of the places our group is now visiting, I've been to, and am thankful for those opportunities. But I've never been one, before going off to a foreign place or wherever, I've never been one to want to get online and see 100 and 1,000 pictures of where I'm about to go to. I've never been one that wants to sit down with your memory book of your trip before I go on the same trip. I don't want to see it. No offense, but I want to just experience it as though I'd never seen it. Does that make sense? To be awed by it, to be pleasantly surprised. Have you ever had great anticipation of going somewhere, going on a trip? How about this specifically this morning? When it concerns heaven, what are your thoughts about heaven? What do you experience? When you think about heaven, do you have great longing and anticipation? In all honesty, do you have indifference? Some of you may even experience dread when you think about heaven. And I think it's misplaced, but some of us may be there. Heather and I were at a youth ministers conference in January. And one of the keynoters of that conference, one of the speakers, he told a story, a personal story, that resonated with me, and I want to share it with you. He was a youth minister, and he was getting ready this particular day. He had a youth Bible study in a home, a small group Bible study. And he had every intention, waking up that morning, he had every intention of preparing well for this Bible study, okay? And the day just kind of blew up, and we've all had those kinds of days. But he was totally not studied and not prepared like he had planned to be. And so he shows up to this Bible study. He says, oh, I know what I'll do. We'll have a discussion tonight, and I'll ask a question. And here's the question he asked. He asked this to these teenagers. He said, if you had 24 hours to live, what would you do with that 24 hours? If you had 24 hours to live, what would you do? So he passed out pieces of paper and pens, and they start writing what they do with their 24 hours that they had. And then they passed in their papers, and he started to read them one by one, okay? What would you do if you only had 24 hours to live? He started reading the first one, and the first one said this: I would get married and have, we'll call it marital relations. And he grabbed the second one, and it said the same thing. And the third, and by the time he put all these together, most of them had said a very similar thing. Now he was grateful that they were going to get married first. Okay, that's the right way to do this, is the right order. But he was like, really? 24 hours to live, and that's what you're going to choose to do? Okay. Before Christmas, when I was a kid, I'm sorry, I'm telling lots of stories about Christmas. It's April, Christmas is on the mind. Just how it goes. But every year as a kid, I can remember before Christmas and the anticipation of it, I would actually pray. Follow me here. I would pray, God, please don't come back before Christmas. All right? That's a true prayer of mine. I can remember praying it. Don't come back before Christmas. After that, you just come on whenever you want to, but I want to experience Christmas. Really? Why all of this? It is as if we sometimes think, that if we were to go to heaven and to be with God, we would be missing out on something here. Let me repeat that and see if you can relate to it in some way or have. It's as if we sometimes think that if we went to heaven now, we would be missing out on something here. And why is that? How could we come to some conclusion such as that? And I want to throw out just a couple of things, okay? A couple of things that come to my mind. And the first one is simply this: we have it so good here. We've been born in a time and a place where we have it pretty good. I take you back a few hundred years, or not even a few hundred years, not very long ago, where in our nation we had many who endured slavery, and they sang a different tune. Literally, the tunes that they sang and they wrote, they were called the Negro Spirituals. And the Negro Spirituals spoke very much to the trials and the hard times that they endured as slaves. And they would write songs, pen songs such as "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home," which is a longing, obviously, for a better place. There's songs such as "Peace in the Valley," another Negro spiritual. I want to read to you just a few of the lyrics of that one. "Well, I'm tired and weary, but I must toil on until the Lord come to call me away. Where the morning is bright and the Lamb is the light, and the night is as fair as the day. There'll be peace in the valley for me someday. There'll be peace in the valley for me, I pray. There'll be no more sorrow or sadness or trouble. There'll be peace in the valley for me." And as we read that, many of us can't really relate so much because we have things so good here and now. The second reason I believe we sometimes have this attitude that if we left earth today, and to go to heaven, we'd be missing out on something, is simply this: we have such a small view of heaven. We have a very small view of heaven. Does that make sense? And it's that particular thing that I want us to explore today, and hopefully defeat that at least a little bit in our lives this morning. So if you've got your sermon outline, we'll be starting to fill that out at this point. And it says this: it says, why we can't wait for heaven. Why we can't wait for heaven. There's going to be three things we're going to talk about, but let me just be clear. This is not an exhaustive list, okay? But why we can't wait for heaven. The first one is this: the noticeably absent. The noticeably absent. Revelation chapter 21, verse 4 says this: He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. See, there will be things when we get to heaven that we will notice don't exist from our previous existence on earth. Death, mourning, crying, pain, because things there are going to be totally different than they are here. A few weeks ago, I asked the teens to make a list of some of the things on earth that they do not like. And I loved their list. It was pretty extensive. Things on earth that they do not like. And I took their list and I put them into a spreadsheet with they all kind of fit under certain headings. At least I felt that they did. And the first heading was injustice. Once again, these are things on earth that they do not like. Injustice, such as racism, abuse, prejudice, inequality. They listed others as well. Material things, or things of this earth. Hospitals, dentists. Sorry to a couple of you guys. Bleachers, seafood. I like seafood myself, but that someone listed that as something on earth that they do not like, okay? There were non-material things such as divisions, conflict, politics, social class, debt, entitlement, narcissism, death, illness, grief, slow walking, smacking. I'm just reading it, okay? Fear of losing a loved one, worry, expectations, hurtful words, suffering, suicide, war. Can y'all agree with those things? It's like, man, most of them. Those are things that I could sure do without here on earth. And then they listed some sins and temptations such as addiction, pornography, dishonesty, divorce, drugs, abortion, materialism. And I didn't list everything that they listed there for you guys, but you get an idea. Those are things on earth that they just don't like. And I get it. I get it. And I don't like most of those things either. And for the rest of us, there's probably only a few things we'd add to that list. You know, taxes, arthritis, and the Washington Redskins. That's about it, and it's complete at that point. Imagine a place where the things you don't like here on earth no longer exist. Just imagine it. My mother, who's here today, had some shoulder issues for several years. Just pain in her shoulder. A lot of y'all can relate to different things such as that. And she woke up one morning and it was gone. Can you imagine a place where you wake up and those things that are bad, those things that you don't like, those things that are painful, all those things no longer exist? Can you imagine a place? Are you with me? A place John described as absent of death, mourning, crying, or pain. Heaven, can't wait. The second thing is, as far as why we can't wait for heaven, is this. Number 2, the new and improved. The new and improved. I'm going to be sharing from Paul here in Philippians. First of all, starting in chapter 1, verses 21 through 24. It says this. Here's Paul speaking later on in his life. He says this: "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body." You see this tension that Paul's dealing with? Okay? He's like, I really, really want to go be with God. But I recognize that there's still work here to be done, that the gospel is still here to be proclaimed, and I have work to do here. And he says, to go and to be with God would be, in his words, better by far. Better by far. Philippians chapter 3, just a couple chapters later, he continues, our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him to subject all things to himself. So not only is heaven a far better place, but Paul points out that once we are there, our very selves, our very existence will be much, much improved because we will be transformed, these lowly bodies, to be like his glorious body. Peter says in chapter 3 of 2 Peter, but in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells. You see, the term new and improved cannot always be trusted here on earth. But when we read it in Scripture, we can trust it. The new heaven, the new earth, and a new body. Heaven. Can't wait. Third, why we can't wait for heaven. The suffering scales flipped. Let's be honest. Many of you have endured some tragedies, trials, sufferings, pains. You might say more than your share. Got the pain of loss, the pain of death, the pain of rejection, shattered dreams, depression, broken relationships, physical pain, emotional pain, and the list goes on and on and on for some of us. As a matter of fact, if we were to put your troubles and pains and sufferings on a scale and weigh them against some of the joys you've experienced, for some of you, the scale would just bottom out because of the pains and the sufferings that you've endured. But have I got good news for you? Things are going to be better. Things are going to be much better. Let me share with you what Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 18. He says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Did you catch it? Paul presents us new scales. He says, okay, let's talk scales for just a minute. And let's weigh your sufferings here on this earth against the glory that will be revealed in us. And what does he say about it? It's not even comparable, is what he says. The glory is so much better. He says it different in 2 Corinthians 4:17 when he says, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Now, in no way does Paul say your sufferings and your trials don't matter. That's not what he's getting at. That's not what he's pointing out. He's saying that the eternal glory is so big. It is so huge. That's his purpose in writing here. Your suffering may be a boulder the size of Texas. But suppose you put that rock on one side of the scales, and you put the planet Jupiter on the other side of the scales, which is, I believe, 120-something times larger than Earth. And it doesn't even compare. In and of themselves, your sufferings may be very weighty. But compared to the eternal glory, the everlasting happiness, the endless beauty, and the unbroken relationships, the relative weights change our perspective, don't they? But you might ask, Paul, what do you know about troubles? What do you know about troubles, Paul? What gives you the right to weigh my troubles against the glory of heaven? What gives you the right? What do you know, Paul? Well, I'm glad you asked. He answers that in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, we start in verse 24 through 28. Just follow along. This will not be on the screen. You can just hear me say it or follow along. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 24 through 28. This is, I think, a list of Paul's light and momentary troubles. You ready for it? Here they come. He says this, 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea. On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, in danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, and danger at sea. Danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from all these, there is the daily pressure of my anxiety for all of the churches. Did you hear that? Paul's light and momentary troubles. The fact that he would call them light and momentary tells us more about the glory that he's comparing it to. Well, Paul, what gives you the right to talk about the glory of heaven? What do you know about that? Once again, I'm glad you asked. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, just a few verses after what we just read, he continues by talking about himself in the third person and an experience that he had that he describes as being caught up to the third heaven. And he says that what he heard there was inexpressible, things that no one is permitted to tell. Now, I want to know more about that. And I wish Paul could have told us more about that. But it's as if he says, even if I tried to put words to it, I'm not sure I could do it. But I can't tell you about it anyways. The scales of present suffering versus future magnificence do not compare. It's not even a fair comparison. Heaven. Can't wait. Christmas Eve and Christmas, growing up, we had certain traditions at my home. And one of them was that on Christmas Eve, the 4 of us siblings, I have an older brother, an older sister, and myself, my twin brother. All 4 of us would sleep in my oldest brother's room, which was in the basement of the house, the lower level of the house. There's no windows. It's actually underground. And so we would all sleep in my older brother Brian's room. And it was dark, really dark. And we had so much anticipation about Christmas, okay, that it was really hard to sleep. And my older brother couldn't see very well without his glasses, so he had this big, I guess it wasn't LED, but it was this clock beside his bedside table, on his bedside table, that had these huge numbers on it so that he could read it. And I just remember that clock going minute by minute by minute by minute, finally another hour and a minute and a minute. Oh, it was horrible. Because Mom and Dad had a rule. They said, you guys cannot wake us up until, and they always set the time. Say it was 7 o'clock in the morning. All right? You can't wake us up until 7 o'clock. And then we'll have Christmas together. The second rule was you can't go into the living room where Christmas was. So there we were watching the clock throughout the night. Finally, 7 o'clock hits. And just above my older brother's basement bedroom was my parents' room. So we would take anything that made noise, trumpets, trombone, drum set, stereo cranked to 11, we'd bang and hit and yell and holler and do everything we could do at 7 o'clock to wake our parents up who were right above us. And once we were convinced that they were stirring and getting ready, all right, then we had achieved that goal. But here's the problem. When you wake up in the morning, we don't have to answer this out loud, but when you wake up in the morning, one of the first things you probably need to do is find a restroom. And there in my brother's basement bedroom, there was no plumbing in the basement level of the house. And if you go up the steps from the basement and you turn to the right, there's the living room. That's where we're not supposed to go. It's not what we're not supposed to see. But to the left, you go through the dining room, the kitchen, and on into our half bath. And so my older brother and older sister, as kind as they were, they would take me and my twin brother, being the youngest ones, one by one, and we would get towards the top of the steps, and what would they do? They would cover our eyes. And they'd walk us to the top of the steps, and we'd turn left, and we'd go through the dining room, go to the restroom, come back, cover our eyes, and bring us back one at a time. Now, there are two things I found out about my brother and sister recently that somewhat disturbed me, okay? One of them was this. When we were younger, my sister, and we played Monopoly together, my sister was always the banker. Yeah, whoever's laughing, don't trust them. They know exactly what's going on here. My sister was always the banker. And I'm not proud of her at all. She's a bank robber. She'd give a little here and take a little there. Okay, not proud of that. But the other thing I found out about my brother and sister was this. On most of those Christmas mornings when they covered up our eyes and took me and my twin brother to the restroom and brought us back eyes covered, they admitted recently that they always caught a peek of Christmas, a glimpse of Christmas. And now they never did this, but imagine if they would have brought me and Jason down the steps and they would have gathered us and said, okay guys, I want to tell you something. I caught a peek, a glimpse of Christmas. And Santa came. And it's going to be awesome. I almost imagine this is kind of what John and Paul have done for us. As if they had said, hey guys, I want to tell you something. I've caught a glimpse of heaven. And it is going to be awesome. They don't go into great detail describing every little thing that they saw. They leave us room to imagine. They whet the appetite, if you will. Leave us space to wonder and to dream and to anticipate and to be surprised. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. As it is written, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. We have much to look forward to. And it's better than anyone has ever seen. That's what it says. It's better than anyone has ever seen. And it's greater than anyone has ever heard of. And it's far beyond what you can possibly imagine. Isn't that what these verses say? It's far beyond what you can ever imagine. So which is it for you? Heaven can wait, or heaven can't wait? You need to know this as we wrap up this morning. Heaven is not going to be for everyone. You might say, what? I want you to read it again. God has prepared for those who love him. Now don't misunderstand me. God wants everyone there, doesn't he? But not everyone will choose to love him. So I ask you a few questions here this morning as we end. Do you love God? Do you trust God? And have you given yourself to him? You can be baptized today and join the priesthood of believers who have an incredible, eternal dwelling place in heaven. Or if you have something more of a concern that you just want to share with an elder and his wife, we offer you that opportunity as well in room 102 during the singing of this song. If you want to respond in some way, you're welcome to do that. We encourage you to do that. Let's stand and let's sing about heaven together. Of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place when we all